Welcome to reality. You're now on the Code of Mind channel. Have you heard of the last Thursday theory? You were switched on today. This is a philosophical hypothesis that is seriously discussed by philosophers and logicians. Today I want to tell you what this theory is, who proposed it, and why it is considered one of the most disturbing ideas about reality ever conceived by humans. The essence of this idea is frighteningly simple. What if the world has no past? The world could have been created already complete, with mountains that are millions of years old, with childhood photographs, with memories of school, with the feeling that you have already lived a life. And all of this could have appeared in a single moment, for example, last Thursday, or yesterday, or right now, in the exact second you started watching this video. You have never seen the past directly. You have only seen its traces. You were never there. You have always been here in the present. Everything you call the past comes to you as memories, photographs, stories, documents, sensations, all of which you experience right now. And this is where the thought appears that makes this theory one of the most uncomfortable imaginable. How do you know that these traces actually point to a real past and were not created together with you? This idea first appeared as a philosophical thought experiment. Just a thought someone once allowed themselves to follow all the way through, and the further you follow it, the less ground remains beneath your feet. Because you have no way to prove that the world existed before this moment if you were switched on today. What are you going to do on your first day? Neuroscientists have long known something that is uncomfortable for most people to hear. The brain does not store memories. At all. It does not open a file of the past. It does not replay a recording. Each time you remember something, the brain reconstructs it from scratch, in the very moment of recall. What you call memory is actually a process of reconstruction. Every time you are essentially reshooting a movie about your past using fragments of a script that remain. There are real experiments. People were shown home videos from their childhood. Later, subtle changes were made to those videos. A person was added who had never been there. Locations were altered. Events that never happened were inserted. Then they were asked to remember. And something strange happened. People did not just hesitate. They confidently remembered the altered version as their own life. They said, "Yes, I remember that moment. Yes, that's how I felt. Yes, that was important to me." Even though it never happened. The brain did not object. It did not signal an error. It simply integrated the new details into the story as if they had always been there. One neurobiologist described this perfectly. The phrase spread across science forums and popular science discussions. Memory is not an archive. It is fan fiction written by the brain in real time. And here is where it becomes truly unsettling. Because if this is true, then even in ordinary life you never interact with the past directly. You always deal with a current version of the past, dependent on your present state, colored by current emotions, adjusted to who you believe you are today. Your memory changes along with you. Now stop and think. If even in normal reality the past is reconstructed every time, how is that fundamentally different from uploaded memory? If you never see the past as it actually was, if you always interact with a reconstruction, how can you distinguish lived experience from implanted experience? The brain does not label memories as real or loaded. It only cares about one thing: narrative coherence. And if coherence requires adding a scene, it will add it. If it requires adjusting emotion, it will adjust it. If it requires removing inconsistencies, it will remove them. Now connect this with the last Thursday theory. If the world was created recently and memory was embedded, your brain would function exactly as it always does. It would not panic. It would not sense falseness. It would not say, "Something is wrong." Because for the brain, this is how it has always been. And here arises the most uncomfortable question of the entire theory. If even real past is never directly accessible, if it is always constructed here and now, then what is the fundamental difference between a life that unfolded over years and a life that was loaded with a history? The answer is unpleasant. Practically none. And once you understand this, the last Thursday theory stops being a strange hypothesis. It becomes dangerously plausible. At this point, people usually want to say, "All right, now this is just science fiction." But the problem is, This is where science begins. In physics and cosmology, there exists a hypothesis known as the Boltzmann brain. It sounds almost comical, but the idea behind it is cold. The hypothesis states that, in an infinite universe, where time and space have no limits, the spontaneous emergence of a single conscious mind with fully formed memories is statistically more likely than the emergence of an entire universe with a long, continuous history. In simpler terms, from a probability standpoint, it is far easier for you to appear fully formed than for billions of years of evolution, galaxies, planets, civilizations, and all the events you consider your past to exist. This is not a joke. This is not a philosophical metaphor. It is a direct implication of mathematical models dealing with infinite systems. On scientific forums and in academic discussions, people openly write, "We cannot prove that we are not Boltzmann brains." And this is not a figure of speech. No experiment, no observation can rule out the possibility that your consciousness appeared already complete, with memory, personality, language, and knowledge of world history. One physicist formulated it this way, and the phrase circulated for a long time. The most rational assumption is that you came into existence a second ago with the feeling of billions of years of history. Why is this so terrifying? Because a Boltzmann brain is not a malfunction or a glitch. It is a fully functioning consciousness that feels real. It remembers childhood. It remembers education. It remembers fear and joy. It is convinced it lives in a world with history, and it has no way to know that this history never existed. It does not feel falseness. It does not sense substitution. Everything feels completely natural. And here, the last Thursday theory meets science face to face. Because a Boltzmann brain is essentially last Thursday translated into the language of physics. A consciousness that did not live its past, did not evolve toward this state, but appeared instantly, with the sensation that everything had already happened. Scientists may say it is unlikely, strange, impractical, but they cannot say it definitely did not happen. Because all the data we possess fits equally well with a model of long history and with a model of instantaneous emergence with memory. And at this point it becomes clear. If science itself allows for the possibility of consciousness with a false past, then the question, did the past actually exist, stops being a philosophical game. It becomes a real, uncomfortable, unsolvable problem. And it gets worse. Because if a Boltzmann brain is possible, then simulation makes this idea not just possible, but technically convenient. And that is where we are going next. Here, the theory stops being philosophy. Because if a Boltzmann brain is possible at all, then simulation turns it into a practical architecture. Imagine the world as a system, a massive engine maintaining the illusion of stability. Then, last Thursday no longer sounds like a joke. It sounds like a dry line from server logs. Update installed, restart complete. You ask, but how does the past exist then? And the system answers very simply. The past does not need to be lived to be convincing. It needs to be logical, internally consistent, synchronized between observers, and detailed enough that you do not ask unnecessary questions. Look at how this works in video games. In a game there is a world, there are walls, there are cities. There is world history, legends, wars, kings, catastrophes. But when you approach the edge of the map, the world does not continue on its own. It is drawn in, loaded, rendered. Nothing behind your back is required to exist in detail. It is enough that you believe there is a past there. If our world resembles such a mechanism even by 1%, then last Thursday becomes a perfect scheme. There is no need to live through billions of years to create the feeling of billions of years. It is enough to have background cosmic noise that hints at ancient origins, geology that looks old, archives that appear convincing, and our memory that says, I remember this. Because a simulation does not need to fake reality crudely. It does not need to draw a fake world. It only needs to make you finish drawing what is missing yourself. And this is no longer a theory. This is psychology. There are phenomena that chill not mysticism, but science itself. When a person loses memory, Things sometimes happen that look like magic. There are thousands of such stories from practice and from the internet. It looks like this. A person wakes up after trauma and does not recognize loved ones. He looks at a woman who is crying and says, "I am your mother." And inside him, emptiness. Sometimes he begins to speak differently, with another accent, or even in another language. In psychology, this is called confabulation. The brain does not acknowledge a gap. It does not say, "I don't know." It says, "I know." And then it fills in the blanks. It takes fragments, a face, an intonation, a word, and assembles a past from them. Then relatives do what they always do. They show photos, tell stories, name dates, remind names, and the brain gradually stitches together a new version of the personality, not because it remembered, but because it found support, built logic, and made the story internally consistent. And now, an important detail. Psychology and neuroscience often say that the brain can cut off trauma, dull memories, rewrite details so as not to destroy the organism with stress. Officially, this is presented as a Zashitny mechanism, a protective mechanism. But here is the question. If the brain is capable of reassembling a personality after a memory collapse, how is that fundamentally different from loading a history at startup? Do you understand? The scientific explanation does not remove the horror. It only translates it into the language of mechanics. The brain is an equal generator of plausible stories, not an archive of truth. The Mandela effect sounds disturbing, but there is still comfort in it. It says, something changed, which means there was a before, and there is an after. There is a comparison point. There is a past that was at least once real. In the Mandela effect, there is always a loophole. You can argue, look for causes, hope that somewhere an original version exists. Last Thursday removes this loophole completely. It says something else. Nothing changed. It was never there. It was not corrected. It was not replaced. It did not exist originally. And here, reality collapses. Because if the past never existed, then all discrepancies stop being errors. They become loading variants, like in a game. One player has patch 1.2 installed. Another has 1.3. Someone played with mods. Someone played the clean version. They can argue until they are hoarse that it used to be different, but none of them can prove that their version is the original. On forums, this is sometimes phrased frighteningly simply. One user wrote a line that spread quickly in screenshots. We argue about memory versions like players with different patches. It sounds like a joke, and until you realize that logically it is flawless. The Mandela effect still assumes that the world changed, which means there is a point where you can say, here is where the glitch happened. Last Thursday says, there is no point. There is only the current version. Coherent, logical, plausible enough that you do not ask unnecessary questions. And if someone's memory does not match, that is not a system bug. It is a mismatch of builds. With the Mandela effect, you can say, okay, memory made a mistake. With last Thursday, you cannot even say that, because memory is the only thing you have. You cannot step outside and check the original. You cannot roll back to an older version. You cannot open the source code. You can only feel certainty, feel doubt, feel inconsistencies. And all these feelings will be equally real, regardless of whether the past actually existed. And this destroys the very idea of return, correction, let's bring things back the way they were. Because the way they were may have never existed. And here a question appears that can no longer be dismissed. If there is no past, if there is no reference point, if all memory versions are equally valid, what does reality rest on at all? And this is where the next level begins, the most dangerous one. Because next, the conversation is no longer about the world. It is about you. We are used to thinking that the meaning of life rests on the past, on lived years, mistakes, missed chances, pain that must be redeemed, on the script of, you already owe because. But if the past is guaranteed not to exist, this entire construction collapses. Because if you did not live before and were launched now, then guilt loses its power. You are not obligated to pay for what may never have happened. The fine of "I am late" disappears. It is impossible to be late to something you are entering for the first time. Age becomes just a parameter, not a verdict, not a limitation, not proof that it is too late. Comparison with others dissolves, because their past is just as unprovable as yours, and only one thing remains. You exist now, not as a continuation, not as a result, not as a mistake of the past, but as the only fact that cannot be erased. And at this moment, the psyche usually does something strange. It either becomes afraid and runs back to old explanations, or unexpectedly exhales. Because if the past has no power, then a person stops being a hostage to their story. They are no longer obligated to fix themselves, prove worthiness, chase someone else's lifeline, endure for the sake of later. And here we come to why this theory is truly dangerous. Not for the person, for the system. Every control system rests on the same mechanism: past, guilt, debt, obedience. You are constantly reminded who you were, what you did, what you missed, how much you owe, why you have no right to start over. The past is the perfect instrument of pressure, because it cannot be changed, which means it can be used to control. But the last Thursday theory does one terrifying thing. It takes the past out of the system's hands. If the past is unprovable, if it can simply be a version, if it can be a loaded package, it loses the right to command the present. And without the past, it becomes impossible to manipulate guilt, impossible to scare with "you already ruined everything," impossible to keep a person in the role of debtor, impossible to feed the script "endure now, life will come later." If the world was launched today, you owe no one anything for yesterday. And this is not philosophy. This is the breaking of a control lever, because the most controllable person is the one who lives in constant dialogue with their past. And the most dangerous one is the person who no longer considers the past an argument. That is why this theory is almost never discussed openly. That is why it appears only on forums, in quiet philosophical threads, in comments of people who no longer want to be a function of their history. If you were switched on today, it does not make you fake. It makes the present the only real thing. And that means every choice now is absolute. Every realization is the first. Every thought is not a continuation, but a beginning. And if this is your first day, you have no excuses, but you have freedom. Because a life that begins now has not yet had time to limit you. Thank you for being with me on this channel. I wish you the best possible branch of reality. Subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video. Take care.